Welcome back to Guitar Theory Modules. This is Module 3 and we're on pages 15 and 16. In Module 2 you learned about half steps and whole steps, how to play them, how to read them, and how to write them. In this module you're going to learn how major scales are constructed with half steps and whole steps. This is a really important lesson because so much of our music is based in the major scale. No matter what note you start on, every major scale has the same pattern of whole steps and half steps, and this pattern is what makes a major scale sound like a major scale. To play a major scale on one string, you start on any fret, any string, and you follow this pattern. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, or whole, half, whole, half. And what you do is you start counting the whole steps and half steps after you play the first note. The first note is just your starting point. So if you follow this pattern starting on the first fret, first string, your major scale would look like this. Whole, half, whole, and half. And you want to play that on the way down too. So here's a playing assignment for you. Start on any note and play a major scale up and down whatever string that note starts on. Follow that whole, half, whole, half pattern, and while you play, actually say out loud, whole, half, whole, half. And remember, you start counting your whole steps after that first note. The first note is just a starting point. You start counting your steps after. Whole, half, whole, half. And played on the way down too. This is a great way to learn what the major scale sounds like, and if you repeat that whole step, half step pattern while you're playing it, it'll really help that pattern sink in. Playing single string majors is well and good, but the real power comes when you can play major scales moving across strings. On page 16, we have a series of major scale forms. And if you don't know how to read a chart, I have a video on reading scale charts, and I'll leave a link for that in the description, and you might be able to figure it out just by watching me play these scales. Now, if you already have my book, Guitar Theory Modules, you'll see some hints for reading scale charts right there on page 16. Each of these scale charts follows the whole, half, whole, half pattern, and you'll also find that you'll play through the entire pattern at least once with every scale, and then you'll stop somewhere in the middle once you reach the first string, and that's because we're playing as much of this pattern as we can within a small area of the fretboard. These scales are movable, and you can play any of these scales anywhere on the neck, and the name of your starting note is the name of the major scale you're playing. I'm going to pick the note D flat. Now, D flat major is typically not a guitar-friendly key, but if you know these scale forms, you'll be able to play in the key of D flat or any other key anywhere on the neck. So I'm going to play a D flat major scale with each of these forms, and I'm going to start with form 1. When I do this, I'm going to recite that whole step, half step pattern. Major scale form 1 starts on the 6th string with your 2nd finger, and you need to find the D flat on the 6th string, and that is at the 9th fret. So I'll play through the form and I'll say the pattern. Remember, you don't start counting until after you play your first note. So there's your starting point, and then whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole. As I said, we're going to stop somewhere in the middle of this pattern through most of these forms. Now you want to play that backwards too. Major scale form 2 also starts on the 6th string with your first finger. So we start on that same D flat at the 9th fret, and I'm going to play this and say the pattern. Remember, you start the pattern after your first note. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, and that's where we stop in the pattern. Make sure you play it the other way. Major scale form 3 also begins on the 6th string, but this time with your 4th finger. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and back down. Major scale form 4 begins on the 5th string, so now we need to find the D flat on the 5th string, and that's at the 4th fret. This form starts with your 4th finger. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, and then play it on the way down. And major scale form 5 also begins on the 5th string, but this time with your 2nd finger. So place your 2nd finger on that same D flat. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, and back down. So here's your other playing assignment for this module. Pick a note, any note, and find that note on the 5th and 6th strings. Then play each of these scale forms starting on that note. While you play it, recite the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern, making sure to start counting that pattern after your first note. The reason I want you to recite this pattern as you play is so that you're not just memorizing finger patterns by rote, but you're learning how that half step, whole step pattern fits into these major scale forms. Make sure you include these scale forms in your practice sessions and commit them to memory. This is going to be a big help in understanding the fretboard, as well as learning new melodies and improvising. Now, it's going to take a while to memorize these new forms, so feel free to move on to Module 4 as long as you're including these scales in your practice sessions. If you ever feel overwhelmed by the material in any of these modules, that's perfectly okay. Slow down, take some time with the modules, and maybe review some earlier modules. Remember, this is not a race. Take this all at your own pace. You can learn from all my theory videos without my book, but if you do order my book, Guitar Theory Modules, you'll have all this information in one place, and you might find it a little easier to follow along. So I'll leave a link for that in the description. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in Module 4, where you're going to learn how to write major scales.